In today's course of child psychology, we will discuss about prenatal development. The main objectives of this lesson are to understand what child psychology is, what prenatal development is, and the stages in prenatal development, which will be germinal, embryonic and fetal stage. Human development became a focus of serious study comparatively late in the history of science, having its origins only a little over 100 years ago. Despite its relatively short history, however, developmental psychology has grown at an astonishing rate in the last several decades and is a thriving modern day field of study. Each year, hundreds of books and thousands of articles about children's growth are published for professionals interested in specific theoretical issues and for parents or teachers. Scientists and laypersons, however, have not always had such a focused and conscious desire to understand the process of child development. In fact, societal attitudes towards childhood as a concept have shifted considerably over the last several centuries. Now, the concept of childhood. Contemporary society views childhood as a separate, distinct and unique period, a special time when individuals are to be protected, nurtured, loved and kept free of most adult responsibilities and obligations. Child labor laws try to ensure that children are not abused in the work world, and the institution of public education signals a willingness to devote significant resources to their academic training. But childhood was not always viewed in this way. Childhood development that occurs from birth to adulthood was largely ignored throughout much of history. Children were often viewed simply as small versions of adults, and little attention was paid to the many advances in cognitive abilities, language usage and physical growth that occurs during childhood and adolescence. Interest in the field of child development finally began to emerge early in the 20th century, but it tended to focus on abnormal behavior. Eventually, researchers became increasingly interested in other topics, including typical child development as well as the influences on development. An understanding of child development is essential, allowing us to completely understand the cognitive, emotional, physical, social and educational growth that children go through from birth and into early adulthood. While you might think of a child development as something that begins during infancy, the prenatal period is also considered an important part of the developmental process. Prenatal development is a time of remarkable change that helps set the stage for future psychological development. The brain develops over the course of the prenatal period, but it will continue to go through more changes during the early years of childhood. Let us understand the learning theories that were proposed during these times. The learning theory approaches provides important information in understanding the development of a child right from genetic influence to expression of this information through behavioral characteristics. Let us understand the behavior analysis that relies on two basic forms of learning, classical conditioning and operant conditioning, to bring about behavioral change. The social cognitive theory, as outlined by Albert Bandura, adds observational learning as an important mechanism by which behavior is continuously modified and changed. The cognitive developmental approach. Jean Piaget's cognitive developmental theory highlights the child's construction of schemas or patterns of acting and thinking about the world. Through assimilation and accommodation, a child's schemes actively adapt to the demands of the environment by becoming more organized, conceptual and logical. Cognitive development progresses through a series of qualitatively different stages according to Piaget's theory. Information processing approaches. Information processing models use the computer as a metafin accounting for cognitive development. Developmental differences in cognitive structures and processes such as rules, strategies, and procedures account for changes in attention, memory, thinking, and problem solving. Erikson's psychosocial approach. Erikson's psychosocial theory of development focuses on the socio-cultural context in which behavioral needs are met. Personality development through a series of stages in which self and societal demands are resolved to construct one's identity. Individuals who successfully negotiate these demands become contributing members of the society. The contextual approaches. Contextual models view human development from a broad framework involving multiple bidirectional interacting levels as influence. Ecological systems theory. Ecological systems theory looks beyond the immediate experiences of family, peers, and friends, and it considers the broader social cultural context in which development proceeds. Vygotsky's socio-historical theory views culture as the historical legacy of a community and emphasizes the social interaction by which the heritage is transferred from others and adopted by the child to become part of his or her way of thinking. The dynamic systems theory. Dynamic systems theory proposed that new, complex, and sometimes qualitatively different behaviors arise from the interaction of events at many different levels in the system. Ethological theory. Ethological theory pays special attention to the biological, evolutionary heritage each individual brings to the world as the basis for species-specific behaviors found to be adaptive in interacting with the environment. What develops? Theories differ greatly in their answers to what develops. However, each can bring an important perspective to an understanding of development and help to interpret the many behaviors displayed by children, and in understanding the importance of prenatal care and development of the childhood. Now, let us understand prenatal development, what it is and how to understand it. Prenatal development is the process that occurs during the 40 weeks prior to the birth of a child. There are 3 stages of prenatal development: germinal, embryonic, and fetal. Prenatal development is also organized into 3 equal trimesters, which do not correspond with the 3 stages. The process of prenatal development occurs in 3 main stages. The first 2 weeks after the conception are known as germinal stage. The 3rd through the 8th week is known as the embryonic period, and the time from the 9th week until the birth is known as the fetal period. Simply put, the first trimester ends with the end of the embryonic stage, the second trimester ends at week 20, and the third trimester ends at birth. The germinal and embryonic periods occur in the first trimester. The fetal period begins towards the end of the first trimester and continues through the second and third trimester. The brain. One of the most remarkable aspects of prenatal period is the development of brain. By the time babies are born, they have approximately 100 billion neurons or nerve cells which handle information processing at the cellular level in the brain. During prenatal development, neurons move to specific locations and start to become connected. The basic architecture of the human brain is assembled during the first 2 trimesters of prenatal development. Typically, the 3rd trimester of prenatal development and the first 2 years of postnatal life are characterized by connectivity and functioning of neurons. As the human embryo develops inside its mother's womb, the nervous system begins forming as long, hollow tube located on the embryo's back. This pear-shaped neural tube, which forms at about 18 to 24 days after conception, develops out of the ectoderm. The tube closes at the top and bottom at about 24 days after conception. 4 important phases of the brain's development during the prenatal period form, and they include: 1. The neural tube, 2. Neurogenesis, 3. Neural migration, and 4. Neural connectivity. This sums up the development of the brain during prenatal period, and once the target cells reach the destination, it grows into a more complex structure. The corresponding figure shows that the nervous system still has a tubular appearance 6 weeks after conception. Let us understand the importance of genetics in human development. Differences in gene expression, whether as a result of standard regulation process or through mutation, are crucial to an individual's physical and psychological development. The exact extent to which genes as a complete opposing factor to an individual environment determines or influence psychological development is always debated. This controversy is known as the nature versus nurture debate. However, an individual's genetic makeup at the very least serves as an important factor or crucial baseline, which may then be mediated by the environment. For such characteristics as the ability to begin learning spoken language, such personality traits as a tendency towards aggressive versus submissive behavior, and risk levels for such diseases as alcoholism and addiction. Before birth, a fetus of course had limited opportunity to be shaped by its environment, beyond factors such as the mother's diet, substance use, and anxiety level. For this reason, genetics plays a particularly important role in prenatal development. While you might think of child development as something that begins during infancy, the prenatal period is also considered an important part of the developmental process. Prenatal development is a time of remarkable change that helps set the stage for future psychological development. The brain develops over the course of the prenatal period. It will continue to go through more changes during the early years of childhood. As you can see, human development begins with the penetration of the egg by a single sperm as shown here. The egg and the sperm are magnified greatly. Although the egg is the body's largest cell and the sperm its smallest, each contributes 23 chromosomes to form the hereditary basis for the development of a new living entity. Let us understand the germinal stage. The germinal stage begins at conception when the sperm and egg cell unite in one of the two fallopian tubes. The fertilized egg is called a zygote. Just a few hours after conception, the single-celled zygote begins making a journey down the fallopian tube to the uterus. Cell division begins approximately 24 to 36 hours after conception. Through the process of mitosis, the zygote first divides into 2 cells, then into 4, 8, 16 and so on. A significant number of zygotes never progress past this early part of cell division, with as many as half of all zygotes surviving less than 2 weeks. Once the 8-cell point has been reached, the cells begin to differentiate and take on a certain characteristics that will determine the type of cells they will eventually become. As the cells multiply, they will also separate into 2 distinctive masses. The outer cells will eventually become the placenta, while the inner cells form the embryo. Cell division continues at a rapid rate during the approximately week-long journey from the fallopian tube to uterus wall. The cells develop into what is known as a blastocyst. The blastocyst is made up of 3 layers, each of which develops into different structures in the body. 1. Ectoderm, which later develops into skin and nervous system. Endoderm develops into the digestive and respiratory systems. Mesoderm develops into the muscle and skeletal systems. Finally, the blastocyst arrives at the uterus and attaches to the uterine wall, a process known as implantation. Implantation occurs when the cell nestles into the uterine lining and rupture tiny blood vessels. The connective web of blood vessels and membranes that form between them will provide nourishment for the developing being for the next 9 months. Implantation is not always an automatic and surefire process. When implantation is successful, hormonal changes halt the normal menstrual cycle and cause a whole host of physical changes. During the early development of the human embryo, an egg cell is released from a maturing follicle within the ovary and fertilization takes place in the fallopian tube, transforming the egg cell or ovum into a zygote. Cleavage and multiplication of cells proceed as the zygote migrates towards the uterus. Differentiation of the zygote begins within the uterus, becoming a solid 16-cell sphere known as the morula. Then a differentiated set of cells known as the blastocyst, which prepares for implantation in the uterine wall. Once implanted, it taps a vital source of nutrients to sustain further development. The embryonic period. The embryonic period, which begins within the implantation of the blastocyst in the uterine wall and continues until about the 8th week after conception, is marked by the rapid differentiation of cells to form most of the organs and systems within the body. This differentiation is known as organogenesis. This is achieved by the production and migration of specialized cells having distinctive functions. Formation of body organs and systems. The first step in the formation of various body organs and systems involves the migration of unspecialized embryonic cells to establish a 3-layered embryo. The 3 layers serve as the foundation for all tissue and organs in the body. The endoderm or inner layer will give rise to many of the linings of internal organs such as lungs, the gastrointestinal tract, the liver, the pancreas, the bladder and some glands. The mesoderm or middle layer eventually develops into skeleton and muscles. The urogenital system, the lymph and cardiovascular systems and other connective tissues. The ectoderm or outer layer will form skin, hair and nails, but its earliest derivatives will be the central nervous system and nerves. How? By simply migrating to a layered configuration do undifferentiated cells come to establish a highly distinctive set of organs and systems? Understanding this process remains one of the most important unresolved issues in prenatal development. However, the immediate environment surrounding a cell appears to play a major role. Although at first unspecialized, a cell's potential becomes constrained by its association with neighboring tissues. In other words, cells are induced by their surroundings to take on certain forms and functions. The fetal period. The change from embryo to fetus is signaled by the emergence of bone tissue at about the 8th week after conception. Organ differentiation continues particularly in the reproductive system and the brain. However, the fetal period is best known for growth in size and the beginning of processes that assist organs and systems to function. One positive consequence is that the fetus becomes much less susceptible to many potential damaging environmental factors. During the 3rd month after conception, the fetus increases to about 3.5 inches in length and about 1.5 ounces in weight. Its movements become more and more noticeable. At 9 weeks, the fetus opens and closes its lips, wrinkles its forehead, raises and lowers its eyebrows and turns its head. By the end of 12 weeks, the behavior have become more coordinated. The 2nd trimester. In the 2nd of the 3 trimesters into which prenatal development is sometimes divided, the fetus's body grows more rapidly than at any other time. By the end of the 4th month, the fetus is about 8 to 10 inches long, although it still weighs only about 6 ounces. During the 6th month, the fetus rapidly starts to gain weight, expanding to about 1.5 pound and reaching a length of about 14 inches. By the middle of the 2nd trimester, fetal movements known as quickening are obvious to the woman. The fetus stretches and fidgets as well. Near the end of this trimester, brainwave patterns begin to look like those observed in the newborn. Should birth occur at this time, there is some chance of survival if specialized medical facilities are available. The third trimester, the final months and finishing touches to the astonishing progress in prenatal development. The cerebral hemispheres, the regions of the brain most heavily involved in complex mental processing, grow rapidly, folding and developing fissures to give them a wrinkled appearance. Myelin, which helps to insulate and speed the transmission of neural impulses, begins to form and surround some nerve fibers. Brainwave patterns indicating different stages of sleep and wakefulness can also be observed. The sense organs are developed sufficiently to enable the fetus to smell and taste, as well as to hear, see, feel, and even learn. The fetus continues to gain weight rapidly, nearly half a pound per week, although growth shows in the weeks just preceding birth. Control of body temperature and rhythmic respiratory activity remain problematic if birth occurs at the beginning of the third trimester. Viability or the ability of the fetus to survive outside the womb dramatically improves over the course of these 3 months. The onset of birth can be expected when the fetus reaches a gestational age of about 277 days. Gestational age, commonly employed in the medical profession to gauge prenatal growth, is derived from the date of onset of the woman's last menstrual period before conception. This method of calculation makes the embryo or fetus about 15 days older than determining age from the date of conception. However, as any parent knows, unpredictability is the timing of birth, and this is the custom. One of the most striking milestones is reached about the 6th week after conception, when the nervous system begins to function. Now, irregular and faint brainwave activity can be recorded. Soon, if the head or upper body is touched, the embryo exhibits reflex movements. In a few more weeks, muscles may flex, but it will still be some time before the woman is able to feel any movement. This figure shows the complete prenatal development from conception to birth. At 3 weeks, the embryo grows to about 2 millimeters in length. The major segments of the brain begin to differentiate. At 4 weeks, the nerves begin to take primitive form and neural tube begins to fold and knit shut. The eyes and ears begin to take shape. At 5 weeks, the nervous system starts to function and faint brain waves can be recorded. Basic mouth and esophagus begins to develop. Between 6 to 7 weeks, neurons form rapidly at the rate of thousands per minute, and we can also notice the upper lip, jaws, teeth, eyelids, nostrils, tip of the nose and tongue to be formed. The head size also becomes dominant. Between 8 to 12 weeks, the fetus appears to have widely separated eyes and ears are set low in head than they eventually will be. The eyelids fuse shut at about the 9th week. Between 13 to 16 weeks, the division of the halves of the brain is visible. The eyelids have closed. Between 17 to 20 weeks, myelinization of nerve fibers begins. Extremely rapid brain growth also begins. The fetus also grows from about 6 to 7 inches to about 8 to 10 inches long and weighs about 1 pound. The eyebrows also become visible. At 21 to 25 weeks, the eyes are fully formed and may be opened and closed. The fetus reaches about 14 inches in length and weighs nearly 2 pounds. The brainwave patterns become similar to those observed in newborn. Between 26 to 29 weeks, nerve cell formation is complete and brain begins to take on wrinkled and fissured appearance. The myelin begins to sheath, increasing the number of neurons. Between 30 to 38 weeks, the fetus adds about half of its total weight and reaches about 20 inches in length and weighs about 7.5 to 8 pounds. The sensory systems become increasingly functional. The eye color is usually blue or brown and does not change until exposure to light after birth. We need to understand the stages of development to have a very clear understanding of the developmental milestones. These milestones that are reached by the fetus allows us to further understand about any abnormalities that might impact the child after birth. The psychologist requires certain specific information, especially in relation to genetic related disorders, to have a better prognosis. But we must also understand that brain development does not end at birth. A considerable amount of brain development takes place postnatally, including growing in size and volume while changing in structure. The brain quadruples in size between birth and preschool. As children learn and have new experiences, some networks in the brain are strengthened while other connections are trimmed. Let us now go through this again. Child development gained momentum in the 20th century and the focus shifted from abnormality towards understanding the normal course of development. This includes the most important time from conception to birth and all the changes occurring within the womb, or simply called as prenatal development. Prenatal development is the period that extends from conception to birth. During this time, a single-celled zygote is transformed into the complex active organism that is the newborn.